Nickel is covered till 2025, so everything's A-okay. Yep. Do you agree?
A lot of analysts have a tough time putting a number that's, too far from 2% because they never want to be, quote, too wrong. To the Elons and to all the other, supply chain people, the auto people, this is a call out. Please provide some clarity in terms of what your range of production is going to be. And then the mining industry will have a chance of actually delivering that metal for you.
Hello and welcome to Crux Investor. First of all, thanks so much for watching this video. If you like it, give us a thumbs up. It helps us to understand if this is the type of video you want us to be producing for you. You can also leave your comments below as to how you think we did. What sort of questions do you think we should be asking? And of course, what you thought of Mark Selby. You can catch this as a podcast, an article, and a transcription on cruxinvestor.com. And for our Crux Investor Club members, you get early access to this video. And if you haven't already done so, please click the button in the corner of the screen to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, for more videos like this, click the notification bell. We catch up this week with Mark Selby, a nickel market commentator, also CEO of Canada Nickel Corp. They have a project in the Sudbury region, quite a large one, 11th largest in the world. We talked to him today about the sort of ripple effects from the Elon Musk commentary last week on their quarterly, what the impact of that has been. We talk about supply in the marketplace from the Philippines and Indonesia and what's happening there with that dynamic. We also discuss a report from a nickel analyst, quite a good one, and what we think of some of the assumptions, conclusions from that, plus a big call from Mark to automotive manufacturer CEOs to give them, the market, more information, which would really, really help miners today. So a few other topics discussed. Take a look in the description below at some of the topics. Anything interests you in particular, click on the number beside it. That's called a timestamp. That'll jump you to that part of the video. Otherwise, enjoy what Mark has to say. Mark Selby, how are you?
I'm excellent, sir.
Good to hear it.
7 days post EM in the nickel world.
Yeah.
After Elon's big nickel announcement last week.
Amazing. And nickel companies around the world and CEOs around the world dancing a jig of joy, for sure. But we're going to talk about that as part of our weekly nickel catch-up today. So there's a lot we discussed last week, quite controversial topics. Just need to let you know, a lot of feedback, a lot of trolling, a lot of clapping, but a lot of discussion, which is the main thing for people to kind of maybe investigate a little bit more. I'm sure we will over the coming weeks as well, just sort of drill down on a few of those things. So well done for that. We're going to continue with a bit of EM, right?
Yes.
The EM statement last week, Elon Musk statement last week still ripples through the market. Price. Yet again, up.
Yes.
What's going on?
Once again, wrong. Again, nickel prices basically moved 5% off the back of Elon Musk's comment. And again, I know he said miners make more nickel now, but I don't think he was thinking about needing to buy more next week. But again, it's just, with sentiment, fundamental, technical, sentiment or momentum, that definitely falls in the momentum category. Again, I'd love to say the fundamentals, are supporting that, sort of that move higher, but again, not really seeing too much, in the way that would sort of, cause that price level at this point to be sustained. So again, unless there's more momentum comments come out, then I think we'll see it, drift a little bit lower, back towards that $6 amount. Again, the one thing that is sort of underlined is, Philippines ore imports, were decent, but we're not seeing, what we need to see between now and next October is a steady rise in ore inventories in China, because ore imports go away every winter when Philippines hits the rainy season. So if there isn't a bunch more ore on the ground, then, producers may struggle for finding supply, and that, the corollary to that is, there's one of the analysts picking up on the fact that, Chinese stainless steel imports, have been up, year over year to some extent. So whether that's a little hedging by a few people, we'll see. But again, no broad basis support that says that, the prices should move much higher in the near term anyways.
Right. Okay. So one, I guess everyone needs an Elon in their life. It probably helps, but it's not sustainable because the fundamentals, technicals don't back it up, and it's not. But it's nice to have the sentiment now, and also nice to get the attention, because gold has been, and silver have been taking all of the attention. So, nickel's had a few days in the sun, for sure. I think some people have done quite well off the back of it.
Yeah, no, I think our stock has moved up, nearly 2x since the call, which has been tremendous. But I think more broadly, I think you hit on a good point. I think if you're a gold or silver mining CEO these days, there is, huge amounts of capital now flowing into that sector. And again, sort of flowing down the hierarchy of companies, and they are now getting to early stage exploration. In copper, that's now started to happen again since our call back in mid-May. You've seen the high torque copper stocks have actually outperformed most of the gold stocks that people have been pretty fired up about. And again, that's why it's important to get around those turning points, get yourself positioned. But you have seen copper stocks move, and you've seen some copper again trickle down a level or two. They haven't gotten widely down to the exploration stage, but that's happening in copper. Again, nickel, in Australia, Centaurus and some others have raised a decent amount of money. But in North America, the TSX type nickel stocks, and again, the rest of the base metals still really haven't participated in seeing any material capital at this point. So again, having this Elon Musk comment fixates, helps get investors focused on the opportunity in nickel.
It certainly does a bit. Let's go back over some of the ground we've covered in the past few weeks as well, if we may, because obviously the Chinese are reflating, I think, for a start. Indonesia has shut up shop, or closed doors, obviously, and then we're relying on the Philippines to kind of make up the difference. So what are you seeing happening there? Is Philippines going to be able to make up the difference? Yeah,
so again, on the demand side, the reflation trade continues to be very well supported. All of the all the data that I had talked about previously, they're all still heading in the right direction. So in terms of broader commodity reflation, compliments of China, that's definitely coming down the path, and you can see it, particularly in the copper price, which is holding up towards $3 a pound. Philippines, as I said, the key here for supply is how much ore is going to come out of the Philippines. There was an announcement that there was a bunch of mines that were shut down in 2017. The Philippines government is relaxing some of the restrictions on there. Again, in 2017, it seemed like a sizable amount of ore, again, relative to sort of how far the market continues to grow, and the big gap that needs to be filled by Indonesia. It's not, it'll be a little bit more ore. Philippines ore is lower grade than Indonesian. But again, it's not going to come anywhere close to filling the gap, that's been created by Indonesia. So again, it's Indonesian NPI growth versus Philippine ore growth versus Chinese demand. That's the triangle that's really going to determine where prices head over the next 12 months.
And Philippines also, do they have kind of some seasonal outputs as well? Because obviously quite wet over there. Is that an impact factor we need to consider?
Oh, most definitely. The rainy seasons in Indonesia and the Philippines used to offset each other to some extent, so that China had a relatively stable supply of material all year round. But with Indonesia out of the picture, as I said, you're going to have this November, December, Jan, Feb period where Philippines ore exports plunge. There's still one part of the country that's dry, so they still produce ore from that region. But from the rest of the area, you see a massive drop off in ore supplies. And so again, ore inventories need to increase. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's what the market is going. It'll need to increase by several million tons between now and the start of October, if China's going to have sort of enough ore to really see it through that downturn in the Philippine season. And again, sometimes rainy seasons are shorter or longer than normal. So we'll have to see what happens at that point in time.
Okay, a question for you. So there's quite a good newsletter writer in the marketplace, no names basis, but one of the better ones. He seems to say that Indonesia's got this covered. Nickel is covered till 2025, so everything's A-OK. Yep. Do you agree?
I agree with some of his underlying things, but I don't think I necessarily agree with the conclusion. He was writing in response to Elon, and the Elon said we need more now, express concerns with, again, environmentally friendly, environmental sensitive and huge volumes, and you'll get a big contract. This analyst, comment back where look at, we see pretty strong, supply growth out of Indonesia, which I do not disagree with. The kind of numbers that he was talking about, are exactly in line with, the kind of forecasts, that are there. Again, I think there's a question mark around whether the pressure acid leach production will show up, and I share that same question mark. It was supposed to already be in production by now, and a bunch of the projects have already been delayed by several years. So we'll see whether they get there. That pressure acid leach has been troublesome for everybody around the world. So if they don't have any trouble, that will actually be a surprise. But yeah, no, you've seen this. They've got a pretty big increase in supply growth. But the fundamental issue, is he has better and more aggressive demand forecast than a lot of analysts. But as I've said before, a lot of analysts have a tough time putting a number that's too far from sort of 2% sort of trend demand growth, because they never want to be quote too wrong. And the trouble with a metal like nickel is it's a very high growth. It grows at 5% versus 2%. And then because it's very volatile, it not only does it grow on average 5%, but there's years where it grows 8 to 10%. There's years it grows 0 to -2, which obviously we've been going through right now. But when it rebounds, it has always rebounded with pretty sizable year-over-year growth. And so again, on a sort of peak-to-peak basis, you end up with this 4 to 5% trend demand growth. And I think this is to the Elons and to all the other EV supply chain people, the auto people, because again, there's been concerns expressed about nickel and cobalt and other metals from time to time. It would do if you want material from the mining companies, please provide some clarity in what your medium and long-term outlooks really are. I've had discussions with a number of these companies, and they have some pretty spectacular demand forecasts going forward, which are much higher than a lot of analysts have in terms of how quickly and how much metal they're going to need. And so if you don't provide that to the market, and then the analysts will use that into their demand forecasts, if you're not going to get the metal you need, because the analysts aren't going to have the demand growth that's there, and they're going to say, oh, we're going to be balanced or surplus for many, many years. So this is a call out. If there's anybody listening on this, please provide more long-term clarity. Again, don't have to be your individual forecast. Just talk about it as an industry, so you're not giving away any industrial secrets. But please provide some clarity in terms of 2025 and 2030, what your range of production is going to be, and then the mining industry will have a chance of actually delivering that metal for you.
That is smart. That is smart. I can see why, as you're also CEO of a nickel company, I can see why not just nickel, but cobalt, lithium, and all the other parts that go into this EV thematic that we've been talking about, would be more easily able to raise money off the back of that. Right now, you've got long lead times. You're having difficulty the industry is having difficulty raising capital to get into advancing projects. So your feeling, from what I'm hearing, is the analysts don't have the data to be able to make informed or do informed report writing, and as a consequence, bankers aren't able to use that information to be able to say, well, this is a sensible use of our capital. What's the likelihood of a automotive CEO revealing what they're going to need in the short to medium term?
Oh, there's no chance that they're going to reveal their individual forecasts.
Right.
But I think if they can talk about, sort of their view collectively in terms of, really sort of, at least some range of where, electric vehicle demand is headed. And again, it would be, I think, very, very helpful, on that front, for sure.
Okay, so let's come back to some numbers then, if we may, because we kind of were talking about Indonesia, and went over to talk to the automotive manufacturers. Coming back to Indonesia, so what is coming out of Indonesia at the moment? Because this analyst that we're talking about, referring to, talked about 2025, but it's what's happening in 2020 or 2030, for instance.
Yeah. So the update was really focused on out that next 5 years. So you've got production growing by sort of 800,000 or 900,000 tons, which again is sort of in line there. It's going to be offset by 200,000 or 300,000 ton in reduction in production from nickel pig iron in China, because they don't have the ore. That ore is being processed in Indonesia rather than being shipped to China. And beyond that, I mean, again, I think everybody, including him, it's a bit of it's an open question in terms of, okay, if EV demand comes in close to where it's going to be, we won't have enough, and we'll have to look at. And again, as always said, lithium iron phosphate is going to be a big part of the market. It has to be. There's a market niche that makes sense for that. And again, Elon in his call talked about that there's really in his mind, there's two streams. There's a lithium iron phosphate stream and a nickel cobalt stream that will continue to advance in terms of the capabilities of that battery to deliver range. And so, that's again, I think the other analysts who do cover sort of make those long range forecasts. Again, they have very low demand forecasts for stainless steel, which are much lower than trend. And so again, those analysts don't necessarily have, the kind of, overall demand growth that, again, not only doesn't approach the 4 to 5%, including EVs, it even falls short of that 4 to 5% trend demand growth, which is very frustrating from my perspective.
Okay, let's talk about ethical mining. Okay,
yeah.
Big topic, very big topic. I think it's getting bigger. Last week you introduced this concept of net zero, right? So
yeah.
Something you're trademarking, and you've also registered as a corporation. I want to talk around not just that, but things like class 1, class 2, for instance. Should people now be paying more attention to things like class 1, class 2? Because it's been a debate. We've discussed it a few weeks ago. Can you just remind people what the debate is?
Yeah, no, so the class 1, class 2 is something that came up about 2 to 3 years ago, that there's only certain types of nickel that can be used in batteries. If it doesn't come from this source or through this refinery, then it ultimately can't be used to make batteries. Again, this analyst report I'm referring to is very, very well written. And again, there's a lot of things that we agree on entirely. And so one is around, this class 1, class 2 thing is just absolute, I use a more, is 100% wrong. You can take, there's sulfide ore, there's laterite limonite ore, there's laterite saprolite ore, and there are paths with the right cobalt price and nickel price and product price that each of those sources can end up in any one use. And the Chinese will make sure that there's more than enough processing capacity, as they've done in every other material, to transform whatever feed source they can into whatever end use source is required by the market. So do not get caught up in sort of those class 1, class 2 differentials. The other thing as well, that it gets a lot of is the nickel sulfate quote premium. And again, 3 years ago, when all of a sudden you had a new source of nickel sulfate supply, and nickel sulfate is a very small portion of the nickel market, but you had this big new source from EVs, you had a short-term bump where premiums went well up over $2,000 a ton. And so again, all of a sudden it became, there's this massive sulfate premium that will exist now and forever. Again, the reality is in cobalt sulfate trades at a discount to nickel metal. And again, those are produced from often similar feedstocks. So, that's where cobalt has gotten to, and that's where nickel is headed. So again, you won't see a sustainable, premium. There will always be a little bit of one because there's some additional transformation cost to do it from a pure product into an end use product. But by and large, it should be zero, or just either side of zero for most of its, most on any longer run average here going forward.
Okay. Which kind of leads us on to things like the entire chain, the supply chain here, because, before nickel gets to do its thing, before nickel, producers get to do its thing, there's iron ore is involved, right? We need to get iron ore out of the ground. And, again, part of the discussion last week was around the footprint of doing that. Again, explain to people, how this is all connected. What does that chain look like before it gets to nickel?
Sure. So, that the key piece here, and what we're really trying to focus on, with our NetZero initiative is, again, car companies who are building EVs, they're trying to solve a problem, which is, carbon emissions for the planet. And so what they don't want to do is build a product that, in the course of building that product and taking all the various components together, end up creating, a big footprint, that's going to take you 6 years to drive around the car, drive that EV around, and not buy enough gasoline that you actually offset that footprint. They wanted to build as low a footprint operation as possible. And the thing that this industry really needs to realize is, again, there's an entire generation of consumers that sees, looks at CO2 emissions, the same way, we used to look at movies of industry in the 70s with, bright orange colored liquid running out the back of a plant down into a stream and down into a lake. And, rivers used to catch on fire because there was so much pollution in there. That's what a new generation sees with CO2 emissions. As horrific as that seemed to us, there's an increasing number of people who look at CO2 emissions with that same kind of horror. So we really do need to find ways to produce, zero carbon product. And that's, we're in a fortunate position with our deposit and where it's located in Timmins, that we can take a bunch of the existing technology, and make that happen. But the same sort of discussions really need to start happening, because if you really want to take, take that, one step further, when you look at, at the large mining companies, the bulk of the revenue comes from iron ore, thermal coal, and met coal. Almost, you're starting to think about that as sort of the, the cigarette producers of industry, because, again, cigarette producers, it's like, oh, okay, well, we just make them. If people choose to smoke them, they're just exercising the right to smoke them. And if that kills themselves and puts massive costs incurred to the health system, those are all people just choosing to do that. Again, all this iron ore and coal, a huge portion of it goes to China, where it gets converted into steel using traditional processes and, creates a massive amount of CO2 emissions. It's, I think, our industry needs to, needs to own its shit in terms of, that's, we have to think about, really how it's used and start deploying capital and start thinking about our projects, not just to get to this intermediate point, but how do we deliver to industry a cleaner, greener product that, the market really needs. And that's, just coming back to nickel for a second, again, in Indonesia, that's the bulk of that, is more than, again, 100% of the growth that's coming in terms of supply. And so, I do not think, and it will displace, some nickel that's currently being used that could be much lower footprint than the 90 tons of CO2 per every ton of nickel that gets produced in Indonesia. But again, there's a lot of other sources of nickel that either have a bunch of CO2, a bunch of SO2, or a bunch of deep sea tailings associated with them. So again, when Elon's talking about and making a point that nickel is his constraint, is because, I think they're struggling to find environmentally clean nickel that they're quite happy to put in the bottom of the Tesla. So, again, just some more information from that industry to help, inform investors in terms of what the opportunity is, I think would go a very long way to help them get the nickel that they want.
Okay, so if the Teslas of this world, the BlackRocks of this world, the Fidelities of this world are striving to find, in this case, clean nickel, it could be any commodity, to be socially responsible in every way across the entire length of the food chain.
Yeah.
That's great. And whatever, I think some people would call them some snowflake millennials, they want this. But at the end of the day, if there's not enough nickel we're going to have to come back to producing nickel the old-fashioned way, and as dirty, as polluting as that may be, it must. So, what are you suggesting? A bifurcated market in terms of pricing here, or what happens?
Yeah, no, I think again, I think to the extent that there will be insufficient supply of clean green product, and the demand for that will exceed that. Again, there's often times where people would like something, but they're really not willing to pay up for it. Again, we'll see. I think we don't need them to pay extra. This is our whole approach with Crawford and Canada Nickel and NetZero. Really shouldn't cost us anything extra because of the local advantages that we have. But again, I think if prices don't get to a point that they incent enough clean green production, then premiums will have to emerge to make that happen. So again, if you're in the chain, then you want to make sure you get those clean green sources of supply sooner than later, so you don't you get access to it without having to pay the full premium for it.
So, but what are the options available? I mean, do these companies buy carbon credits if they're producing we'll call it dirty nickel, old-fashioned way? Do they get taxed more by governments or by industry? Somehow pays for it. I mean, what are the options available here? What do you see this new world looking like? Because I do get the bit that Teslas will demand it. Millennials and whoever the new version of millennials is will demand it, and more funds will demand it. But at the end of the day, when the rubber hits the road, if they're running out of nickel, they could care less, right?
Agreed. But I think the carbon pricing mechanisms, you're seeing more and more jurisdictions really starting to talk about pricing carbon. And so, when that happens and that really gets factored into the cost, Indonesia, the reason they're doing that in Indonesia is that's the cheaper way to produce the material. So if that starts to somehow as it's make its way out of Indonesia and into the market, and somewhere along whatever carbon is embedded in that product has to be sort of taxed or penalized, then that will start to change behaviors. And again, market mechanisms are generally always the best way to make adjustments rather than individual sort of regulation. And so I think the tricky part is again, China's a huge market. For anybody who thinks that China still depends on the rest of the world for exports. No. I mean, it's a massive internal market, and part of the reason they've been so been flexing their strength politically is because they can really much more afford to do that than they could say 5 years, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. And so I think the thing might be some of the bifurcation that might happen is just more Chinese industry is okay for the time being with that kind of carbon footprint, and the rest of the world might not be, right? So that might be one of the sort of key dividing points in terms of Chinese EV companies aren't going to get to sell their cars outside China because they won't be allowed, or there won't be a market for it, or they'll be taxed so heavily that they'll price them out of the market effectively.
Well, I think in the current environment of trade wars and tariffs going on, it's probably a very topical discussion. Maybe something we can pick up on another time. But are there any examples where bifurcated markets have actually worked? So I was struggling to think of one.
That's a good question. Maybe, you know what, I'll think about that over the coming week and see if I come back with, because again, anytime any kind of bifurcation opens up is that you then end up with, the gap for that product tends to get closed over time. But we'll
come back to that. I just thought it's a very interesting discussion, because that discussion will inevitably come up. It will come out. We talked about it recently in the uranium space. The pros and the cons and the fors and the againsts, and of course it did come to be, because I think most governments believe it's just too hard to monitor and control flow of the commodity. So, but you're right. That's one for a future date. So general mood at the moment is obviously very, very positive. With regards to nickel price, you're going to take a slightly more sanguine approach to this, are you? I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Is this the week it's going to come back down?
Oh no, it won't come back down this week. You'll just see through the remainder of the summer, and I think through till September that, again, I've been saying range bound for a while and haven't been right. But the fundamentals aren't, in the near term, fundamentals just aren't there in terms of really moving things higher. Again, I think where things will get interesting is, when we get to October, we'll have to see what ore inventories are like in China, and how quickly and how aggressively does the Philippine rainy season come into hold, and do we see stainless steel production and consumption push higher in China post COVID? So as I said, range bound for now, and then let's check in September and October, again with range bound with the risk to the upside rather than the downside.
Any inbound phone calls off the back of NetZero from auto manufacturers?
I didn't have any additional calls, but I've had relationships with a number of the EV suppliers who would be looking for product at some point in time. So, part of why we're creating the NetZero metals is to be able to, again, a lot of the EV supply chain, is quite happy to have access to long-term offtake for nickel and cobalt. They are also very keen to put processing plants between your mine and the auto plant and be as sort of close to that as possible. Because the one thing I will sort of emphasize and again sort of drive home across the industry is, all the players that I've talked to, the cheapest, best way to make this product is dissolve it, get it into the system, dissolve it once, and keep it into an end product that then goes to an auto industry. This sort of, making sulfate out of nickel that's in solution takes a lot of energy to crystallize it all, and then the first step that happens when you take it to another plant is it gets dissolved again. So I think it doesn't exist now, but what you're going to see, and I know it's coming because that's the way that a lot of the key players in the industry are thinking, is they want to build these plants with intermediates coming in one end. They'll do more of the nickel upgrading and then produce a final, battery product within, or battery precursor within one single facility, going forward. So, and having a NetZero metal subsidiary, which is separate from the mining operation, really helps in those types of discussions in terms of being able to bring them in to joint venture.
Exciting times, Mark. Exciting times. We'll catch you next week. I'm sure there's been more to talk about, but there seems to be a new thematic in the market now. Yourself and a few other players have approached us and to talk about the perhaps the new way of processing nickel. So I'm kind of intrigued to sort of see if the industry as a whole reacts to what's been talked about in the last couple of weeks. Obviously, got a little kick up the backside from Elon there, and also positively in terms of share price, etc. But also in terms of maybe a new, greener, more efficient way of producing nickel. And those are the two bits that more nickel is great, but greener and more efficient. I think the industry is going to have to wake up to that demand.
Yeah, and again, my call to the auto industry and the EV industry is share more data. Let analysts make better forecasts, and you've got a better chance of getting your nickel. So.